Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today's special episode of What's New in Data. I'm here with the Zach Wilson. Zach, how are you doing today?
Doing great, doing great. Excited to be here.
Yeah, for sure. We're up here pretty high in San Francisco. We got the bay behind us. It was your suggestion to get that as the backdrop. So
Yeah.
appreciate your creativity and insights as always, Zach.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for those of you, I'm sure you all follow Zach already, as hundreds of thousands of followers that go to Zach for his insights on data engineering. Zach, you've worked at Facebook, you've worked at Netflix, you've worked at Airbnb, you name it, and you've been in the trenches building the data engineering pipelines, and you're so generous sharing that knowledge with the data community. But tell the listeners a bit about yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So like I actually started my data engineering career back in 2015. I worked at this company called Think Big Analytics. That's where I got into like Hadoop, and like back then I was like, Hadoop was the craze. Everyone was like, you got to know Hadoop, you got to know MapReduce, you got to know all these things. This is what is the future. And then I like learned a lot of that. And then that's like, those skills were actually what were able to get me in, to get my foot in the door at Facebook. Even though I worked at Think Big Analytics like 6 months. That's it. And because I didn't really go to a fancy school or anything like that. I went to Weber State University. It's like a tier 3 school in Utah. So it's like not like that fancy. When I got in at Facebook, I was the only student, the only Weber State alumni who worked at Facebook, even though they had 40,000 employees. It was just me. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. That's a really crazy thing to figure out. But like, then after that, I like got in and I like started like really finding a groove with it. Right. And like, it was a good time at Facebook. I really, really liked it there. And one of the things I learned at Facebook though, was just like, Facebook is like a very like, the way they do data engineering is very like SQL oriented, very like analytics and SQL oriented. And I wanted to be more of a builder because my archetype of data engineering is more like data engineer, software engineer. I kind of do both. So when I'm doing like just SQL and Python, after a while I get really bored because I want to like build other things. And that's why I left Facebook for that to go to Netflix, because Netflix is like a free for all. They let you do whatever you want there. It's like freedom and responsibility is their like number one cultural tenet there. And it was great there. Learned a lot there. I shipped code in like 11 languages at Netflix. It was so like crazy. Oh, wow. And I learned so much there, and I actually transitioned from a data engineer to a software engineer at Netflix because I wanted to do more like back-end development and systems and stuff like that. But like when I was there, when I was doing that transition, I realized that like I wanted to do that transition, but I also didn't want to like stall out my career in terms of like leveling and stuff like that. So like I essentially got a promotion to staff engineer at Netflix and changed from data engineer to software engineer. And that was a lot. I realized when I was doing that, I was like, this is a lot. Like getting promoted and changing the track. I don't recommend it. You should do one, then the other, not at the same time. Like that was a big thing that happened for me, and that like increased responsibility, I feel like was the thing that really ultimately got me kind of burnt out at that company. And then I quit, and I was just like, I need to take a break. I can't do this anymore.
And now, Zach, you're the founder of this awesome program called dataengineer.io.
Yeah.
It's really a product when you think about it. So I personally signed up for one of the classes. I'm going to talk about my experience there a bit. But tell the listeners a bit about dataengineer.io.
Yeah, for sure. So dataengineer.io is a way to learn like not the basics of data engineering, but kind of the experience that you get, the learnings that you get from experience. So I bake in, it's a 6-week program where I bake in all of the hard-earned knowledge that I got from experience, like whether that be around like data modeling or real-time data or Spark or data quality or communication. We have all sorts of different weeks where we cover things. And yeah, like you can take it 2 ways. You can either take it live in like over a 6-week block, or you can take it self-paced if you want to like not do it in such an intense way, because it is an intense program if you take it live.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of my favorite things about the course. It's not your elementary, like, hey, what is SQL? What is a database? All these things that are, extremely fundamental, but now you can really learn it anywhere. Your course is so cool in that it's like you said, it's from that hard-earned knowledge that you just have to be on the job to know that you'll come across those problems. And you just have people kind of dive into those problems, right? Like do the dimensional modeling with a real Postgres instance that you set up on your
Yep.
laptop. Like, set up Flink, set up Spark, like build those initial pipelines and really get people's feet wet. So when they do go interview for a job, they actually have those skills already. So it's one of my favorite things about your course.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, like it's been awesome. Like I've been building it out, like especially like in the iteration. So we're currently in V3. From V2 to V3, one of the big things I'm shifting is actually taking the content and moving it to be more cloud oriented. So that like we are now, instead of using Postgres, we use Postgres in V2, like local Postgres. And now in V3, we're using Trino in the cloud, with Trino and Iceberg in the cloud. So like we're making it even more real world in that way, where we are going to be using cloud tooling like exclusively for this version of the bootcamp.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. And yeah, I think that ultimately makes the process a bit faster for a lot of the students, right? They don't have to spend as much infrastructure on their laptops. Maybe their laptops aren't beefy enough to run Spark. And
it's great. That's actually like one of the things that I showed is that you can actually, especially like the first 2 weeks on data modeling, it's so accessible now that you can actually like learn data engineering on the phone. Like you can do all the coursework on the phone if you wanted to do it on the phone. It's pretty crazy.
And honestly, that's the future. I mean, I had Zach Henlon on the show, and he has a mobile first BI product, and we were just thinking like, yeah, all the stuff you do in your life in terms of productivity is on your iPhone now. Why don't you do data on it as well? Get your insights just fed to you with push notifications, and then learn about data engineering too.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I mean, especially like for data viz stuff, I could definitely see like a product that's like kind of like Tableau, drag and drop and move things around, build a chart. Like all that seems like the Tableau experience on mobile seems like that's a killer idea.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And what you're bringing to mobile education and data engineering is super cool too. I saw your tweet about it with Trino, and yeah, just making that that expert real knowledge of data engineering accessible, like on your phone, on the go, and then through these live boot camps as well. Just gives engineers data engineers who are breaking into space a lot of options. One of the ways that I think about comparing it is an existing course called Reforge. Brian Balfour used to run marketing at HubSpot started, and he has thought leaders there who have been in the trenches of doing growth and marketing and product for these big unicorn companies and publicly traded companies. And yeah, very similar. It's real boots on the ground, stuff that you actually do on the job, the stuff you actually face. And I think that's the type of knowledge that's the most valuable right now, because definitely the elementary stuff's all out there now and you can learn it anywhere. It's, the stuff you're teaching is so critical to actually doing this stuff on the job.
Oh yeah. Because it's like all the elementary stuff is like ChatGPT and AI. ChatGPT is going to teach all of that, and that's going to be the future. I actually have one of my visions for things is like, I actually have the domain ZachGPT. I actually own that ZachGPT.com. I bought that one. And like, I have this vision of like taking all my like LinkedIn posts and everything and making like my own LLM where people can ask it questions, where it's like, and it's trained off of all the content that I've written. And so that you can learn like my opinion on things. But it could be like in its own like remixed sort of way.
Yeah. So I mean, my stance on this is, AI is going to redefine what it means to be human. What does it mean to be yourself? Because, if you can index all your thoughts to date in an LLM and people chat experiences that make it feel like, hey, I'm learning from Zach. I mean, this all comes back to the individual, what it means to actually be human, because AI is going to do something that mimics a human really well. So, speaking of AI and data engineering specifically, you have a really great insight on how data engineering is being disrupted by LLMs. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, that's like a big one where like, I'm sure some of y'all have heard those articles of like the death of the data analyst from LLMs, and like people are showing like, hey, look, like you can ask ChatGPT to write a SQL query for you. And like, but on all those examples, it's always like, give me the number of sales in New Zealand or something like that. And it's like 3 lines of SQL, and it's like, wow, congratulations, LLM, you can write 3 lines of SQL. But then it's like, if you actually try to ask it for something a little bit more complicated, it's not going to do a good job. Like, it's still like for complex SQL, it's still not quite there. I mean, I want to try GPT-4 Turbo. I want to definitely try like some of the new stuff and see like what it does, because GPT-4 definitely has like a there's a big increment from that versus ChatGPT. I've noticed that, but there's still a bit for it to go there. I think that's one area where that's at risk, like writing SQL, writing pipelines, the technical pieces of data engineering. I think those pieces are more at risk. But then there's this other area of data engineering that is more or less like safe, and that's going to be like talking with people, like discovering the needs. Because like I remember one of my friends, Sundis, she's a content creator on Instagram, and she was saying that data analytics jobs are safe from ChatGPT, and there's only one reason why they're safe, and that's because stakeholders do not know how to actually say what they want, right? Or like describe what they need. If stakeholders could actually correctly describe exactly what they need, then yeah, sure, we can get there. But that's a difficult problem. Being able to describe exactly what you need comes with analytics experience, and you have to know what is it possible, and like you have to have like that analytical mindset already to be able to describe those things. And that's what data engineers and data scientists and all those people do, is they have that analytical mindset of like, they know what's possible, they know what's, available to them. And those things are like things that are difficult for the more like business oriented people to do. So that's where like, and I don't see that changing, because that's like a more of a human problem of like humans and skills and stuff like that. And that like, that's definitely the piece where that's why like in my class, I talk a lot about like data modeling. And like a lot of people, they think of data modeling as like, okay, like you define a schema in the cloud or a schema in Postgres or something like that. And that's like, but that's like physical data modeling. That's like the actual data. But you actually have this higher level concept called conceptual data modeling, which is where it's kind of where you talk with the stakeholder about like, what questions do you want answered? Like, what are the things that you want insight into? And that empathetic process of like going through and having that back and forth with the stakeholder, so that you can build a data model that works for today's needs and tomorrow's needs, but probably not the next day, because it's very hard to get like a completely future-proof data model, because data models evolve over time. But if you can get today and tomorrow, and then let the future like understand that you will probably have to edit your data model in the future, but like you can capture like, it so it has some runway, then that's the skill that really separates like good data engineers from great data engineers, is that ability to like be forward looking as well. And also backward looking. So you can have a data model that like you can apply backwards on your historical data. So you can have like a continuous model back from like whenever the data starts to a forward looking kind of future. And like that process is one that I think is pretty safe from LLMs and ChatGPT and all that stuff, because of the fact it's mostly conversation based. It's very like human driven conversation based. So,
yeah, and absolutely. And some people try to reduce this too much, where it's like, well, all that data will be in the vector database or the LLM, and anyone can go ask a question. And that's where real data engineers know, like, no, that data is not always like in the warehouse or in the vector store. And, you have to build new pipelines and things like that. So when you're alluding to like that human conceptual problem, is always going to be there. And I previously had Patrick Miller on the show. He ran enterprise AI at Google, and now he leads data and AI at Newfront. And he was talking about, look, I have experience in AI, but I know that there needs to be a human in the loop. So what are some of the ways that AI can empower data engineers?
That's great. I think there's a bunch of different ways. Like one way that like I like, it's a thing that I hate about data engineering, that like I have already used AI a bunch of times for, is when you're building a pipeline, say you're building a pipeline in Spark, especially Spark pipelines, it's the best for, is there's two types of tests that you need to do. You need to do your unit tests, and you need to do your production data quality checks. Those are two places that you need to write tests. Otherwise, the quality of the pipeline is not going to be very good. So one of the things about the unit test part of a Spark pipeline is that you have to generate like fake data. And like, oh man, like every time I'm generating the fake data, I'm just like, I hate this so much. I hate this so much. And so what you can do with ChatGPT, which is so amazing, is you can plug in, you say, okay, here's a schema with these columns, and then generate me 20 fake rows for this schema. And then ChatGPT is pretty good. It gives you a pretty good output data set, right? That like you can use to then plug into your pipeline, and then that can be that fake data that you can use to like have your input and expected output. Cause that like every time, like I remember at Airbnb before ChatGPT, I was like generating like CSV files, like by hand, like adding like all the IDs and the commas and making sure the null. And I'm like, why am I like writing data right now? This is it just felt like such a waste of time. Right. And like, I mean, that's actually like, I had such a like pain with that process that like at Netflix and Facebook when I worked there, I just didn't write those tests. I was like, they're not worth it. Not worth it, right? And like, I mean, when I was at Airbnb, I changed my mind about that, where I was like, okay, these tests do catch errors. Because they actually are amazing, because they actually catch errors before they enter production, which is the best time to catch it, because then, you never even have bad data enter production that way. It's freaking really good. But like, just writing those tests is so tedious and painful. And that's a great spot where ChatGPT does a really good job. I think that's a good spot. I also think that it does great if you know different analytical patterns. So like, for example, slowly changing dimension, cumulative table design, retention curve, like a J curve, survivalship analysis. There's like, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 different analytical patterns that like you can ask ChatGPT, say like, hey, give me a skeleton DAG that will generate this analytical pattern. And then you can just start with that in Airflow and you just get the skeleton. And that's amazing, because then you don't have to think about it and like how the tasks all depend on each other, because that analytical pattern is always the same. And so and those are very powerful analytical patterns that you can also use ChatGPT to generate that skeleton for you. And then you just have to plug in the SQL details. So
that's great. Yeah. And all those little annoying things that data engineers don't have to deal with that are super redundant. Seems like ChatGPT and AI in general is a great candidate to automate that, to ultimately empower the person, make them more productive. Now, what's something at a principle level, not just because the technology is not there, but what's something that data engineers should not use AI for?
Ooh, that's good. So I think there's a couple things that data engineers should not use AI for, at least in my experience. Like, this is, I don't know, maybe a controversial take, but like, because other people who I would say would disagree with me on this, is that like SQL generation is an interesting one, where like, I feel like it's getting there. And I think that this is something that I might change my mind about. It would maybe GPT-5 comes out or something like that. Like in the future, I might change my mind about this. But like right now, it's like, if you're asking like, for example, if you ask ChatGPT, instead of like, give me the skeleton of a slowly changing dimension pipeline, but you say, here's the schema of my table, these are the dimensions that are slowly changing, write all the SQL and the pipeline, like that's like, it does a bad job. It doesn't do good. Like there's always like weird mistakes that like there's that meme, right, where it says like, if you use ChatGPT, you spend 10 minutes coding and 24 hours debugging. Whereas in the past, it was like you spend 8 hours coding and 1 hour debugging. So it's like you're spending 3 times more now, because like the errors, once you're dealing with more than like 5 or 10 lines of code, ChatGPT just like is gonna make a mistake. There's gonna be a 1 or 2 like little small things that like are hard to correct, where like, especially if you don't have that much experience, if you're like a new data engineer, you might not even know that it's wrong, because like the query will run, it's just the data's wrong.
Yeah.
So like, and that's why like I don't like using ChatGPT for SQL generation, because it'll give you a query and it will have data, and then like you will maybe feel like, hey, that query ran. It ran. There was not a syntax there. But then like when you look at the data, and the data might even look mostly right, but there's going to be like, a lot of times there's like these nuances around the edges that are like off. And that's where like you don't really want to use it for SQL generation, unless you're asking for a query that's like 5 lines. But then I guess my perspective as a SQL practitioner is I can write those 5 lines of code just as quickly as I could write the prompt for ChatGPT, right? So it's like, I'm like, I don't find it impressive that it can do a 5-line query, right? So yeah.
In data, what does the community mean to you?
Oh, that's great. Community is a very, very important part of data, especially like now as I've like kind of branched away from like big tech and I'm in this new environment, is like community is so important, because like a couple of reasons. Like I know when I post on LinkedIn, like sometimes I'll just post like a hot take, and because like I'll post a hot take literally just because I want to have people tell me I'm wrong, right? And like I want to see the other side, right? And I just want other people to like say like, no, Zach, like it should be this way or that way, and like get like I really love the wisdom of crowds. Where like I remember like my dad told me this story one time where he was in like he's like a mechanical engineer where like the professor put a line on the board and asked everyone in the class to estimate the length of the line, and they all put in their estimate. And then when you average it all together, it's like within 2 or 3%, even though like they have no measuring tools, they're just looking at it and like all of it. But if you take all the data points together, you get pretty close. So you get like that kind of crowdsourcing of knowledge. And that is something that I think is really cool because we are all just on this journey and we all have blind spots. Even me, I have blind spots in data engineering where like, you know, I like, for example, I always like, people are always talking about like DBT and stuff like that. And like, I've literally never used DBT, not even one time, because like in big tech, like we just don't use it. They have like other tools that they use instead of DBT. And then like all these people are talking about it and like, oh, it's the next big thing. It's so hot. And I'm like, okay, like I need to learn from these people. And then I added it to my boot camp and like and that's a great example where community is awesome because I added it to my boot camp, but I'm having someone else teach it so that like, because I don't feel like I should teach that class because like I would be like essentially teaching not from a place of deep experience. And that's the whole point of my boot camp is every class should be deep experience based, right? That's why like in the last one I had like experimentation where I taught it. And then I realized I'm like, I needed to not teach that class. That's a data scientist. That's not me. And like, so I have a data scientist teaching it. I don't know if you know Tim Chan at Statsig.
Oh, wow.
He's going to be teaching that class. And so like that's the whole idea is that like, it's beautiful because if we get this community rolling, ultimately I feel like these boot camps are going to be easier on me because in V2, in that boot camp, I taught all of them. I did 22 lectures, filmed 65 hours of content in 6 weeks. And like, I almost died. It was too much. At the end of that, I was like, I need to sleep for like a year. But like this time around, I'm hoping to, instead of doing 22 lectures, I think I'm going to do like 16. And then I'm going to have the other 6 be done by like guest lectures or outside lectures so that they can, because they'll do it better because there are edges around this data engineering puzzle that like other people know better than me for sure. They know it way better than me. And I want to bring those people in so that like we can have that same sort of deep experience based teaching, but for all the aspects so that like people can really get that, just like what you're saying with Reforge, they can get that same sort of idea, but for the whole data analytics stack.
Wow.
And that community is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best part about it is just how generous people are with their earned insights and how eager the people who are earlier in their career are to really learning from the people who know what they're talking about, know how to essentially, navigate this stuff in a professional environment. So the work you're doing there is incredible. What's next for Zach Wilson?
It's great. Like, so, that's a good one. Like, so I have a couple things that I'm working on right now. So Data Engineer IO. So actually I own a couple domains. Actually, it's interesting because Data Engineer IO was like, when I quit my job, actually Data Engineer IO was not the first product I was working on. It's actually, I didn't start working on Data Engineer IO till like 2 or 3 months into quitting my job. I actually was working on a different product, which I still am working on. It's just, I realized that product like needs a lot more iteration before I can get it to market. So I actually have another domain called techcreator.io.
Oh, wow.
So dataengineer.io is one example of how to run like a bootcamp, like a cohort based class. So I don't use any platforms for my content serving like at all, like, cause there's like content platforms like Maven where you can like sell your course. Maven takes 10% though. And I was like, when I saw Maven taking 10%, I was like, I know I'm sitting on $1 million business and I'm not giving them $100,000. Not doing it. No way. They're not providing enough value to give them $100,000. Right. And so like, I was like, I'm going to make the content. So like for me, like when I'm as an entrepreneur, like I think there's only one company that deserves a % cut of my business. And that is Stripe. Stripe gets their 3% or whatever, right? Their 3% and 17 cents or whatever their weird, monetization model is. But everyone else like needs to be a monthly fee, right? Like it's like a server fee or like a monthly like membership fee or whatever. Sure. It's gotta be flat, right? I like that. But like, so anyways, Tech Creator is the idea. So Data Engineer actually uses the Tech Creator platform So that tech creator is a way to empower other influencers and creators who want to build a course to launch their own course. And it does that. And it also allows you to index all your social media content. So I actually have an archive. So if you go to zachwilson.tech/search, you can actually search all of my social media content. Like, and say you search for Airflow, you can find like the 30 posts I've made on Airflow and then like go through all of them if you want to go through them. And like, and it gives you like a kind of an indexed archive of everything that I've ever written. And I want to integrate Substack as well. So like, because I feel like that will be you got to integrate each platform at a time, right? But that's what Tech Creator is going to do, is it's going to enable people to create cohort-based courses and kind of have like, it's kind of like a super link tree as well as cohort-based courses. So yeah, I'm excited for that. That's going to be launching probably sometime like March or April next year.
Wow. So other thought leaders, educators in the community are going to have, more great technology coming their way from someone who's done it before. So
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
super exciting. Zach Wilson, creator of dataengineer.io. You've taught so many people in the I was pleased to be able to learn from you today. Thank you for joining What's New in Data.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is great being here.